Welcome to Callis Mindset, where discipline meets growth and average simply isn't an option. I'm Cannon Callis. Each episode, we sit down with leaders, builders, operators who think differently and just execute relentlessly. People who've built from the ground up, taken hits, adapted, and just kept moving forward. If you're here to sharpen your edge, build stronger systems, and think at a higher level, you're in the right place. Today's guest is Austin Gary. Austin has built his career in the world of large-scale construction and project management, leading multi-million-dollar projects, managing high-pressure execution, and understanding what it takes to deliver when there's not room for any error. Beyond the job sites and operations, Austin also invests in the next generation, serving as a mentor in a program at Texas A&M, helping develop future leaders in his construction industry and passing down lessons from real-world experience that can teach others. He understands leadership isn't just about building projects, it's about building people. Austin, thank you for being on today.
That was a fantastic introduction. I inflate my ego a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's cool, the projects that you're working on in one of the most populous states for some of the biggest level, volume to size, the team sizes and everything that comes behind the infrastructure.
Texas is growing, but I see Idaho's growing as well. So
it is, yeah, we're growing extremely fast. Being from Texas myself, I have watched that growth on such a high scale. It just continues in Texas. It's not going to stop. But Idaho, it's so evident that per capita and for the size of things, just the growth is so explosive that you could really see the difference because it's a small place to begin with compared to where I'm used to. And, to bring the mindset that I have from being in a big city to an emerging market, it's really exciting to see the opportunity here. And I think I want to also discuss a little bit about your identity and your foundation, because, you don't just get into operating at that high level. You have to get a mindset and find your identity in order to qualify for those types of projects. So how did you become a lead to multi-million-dollar projects?
Yeah. My foundation started at 16 when my parents said, hey, you got to get a job. And I went and started running pools. Actually, I was a lifeguard and learned early on that I just enjoyed people. I had a passion for people, and I just enjoyed feeding off of other people's energy, sharing that energy. So at 17, I actually began managing pools and managing teams, and it was kind of out of just a natural growth. I was an emerging leader. I didn't really do any sports growing up. There were none of those activities as a kid where I could say, man, I'm going to be a leader on a soccer team, or definitely not football. If you've met me in person, I don't have the build for that. But that was the foundation, and I really just leaned into this interest in people and learning about stories and individuals, and figuring out how to motivate other people and how to share the energy that I bring. And I think everybody's got a certain amount of energy in them. You've just got to figure out what they're passionate about. And so my foundation started at 16, 17 when I was working with, at the time, my peers. And then as I progressed, graduating college, I was running one of the largest pools in the greater Houston area with a staff of 100 plus individuals. And those were ages ranging from 16 to I think my oldest employee at one point was 82. She did water aerobics and was fantastic. But as a 23, 24-year-old kid out of school, figuring out how to lead not just different personalities, but different age groups, it was a great experience. And from there, I realized that I wanted to get into something bigger. I enjoyed building, always been a fan of just watching construction. And so I made the shift. I started out doing labor in construction, took the same kind of mentality I had from pools of, starting out just, grunt, greenhorn, sweeping streets in downtown Houston, and just a fuel for learning. gimme, gimme, gimme. My boss at the time probably was annoyed with, my weekly emails of this is what I did, this is what I think I can do, give me more. But that was kind of the fuel, that was the foundation. I really just fed into that energy through my 20s and continued to lean into people. And from there, moved my way up, worked my way up into project management, did various projects, moved from Houston to Austin, back in Houston now. And but one of the consistencies, if you can't tell already, is people. And people makes the world go round. And one of my sayings is, we may be in construction, but we're a people business that happens to build things. And I take that energy, and that's how I teach my interns and my entry level engineers, as well as now the high schoolers that I'm getting ready to mentor. So
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like it started when you were a teenager and you had an opportunity. You identified that you are pulled towards understanding people, the psychology, the behaviors, maybe the relationship element to it, what motivates them, and then how to manage them kind of came as a result of that.
yeah,
And then keeping the mindset of opportunistic when opportunities knocking, answering the door, having the confidence to ask for more, and also let them know what you've already done, which is so important. I think a lot of people, they do the job to the bare minimum, and then they wonder why they're not getting a promotion or why they're not getting an opportunity when they haven't given anything of value for free.
yeah,
And so when you ask and you ask for it to go above and beyond, you ask for that opportunity, that shows leadership within yourself, but also sometimes people that are in positions of power can see that and say, okay, this guy's going to be great influence on other people around him and the team that he runs. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. And
yeah,
then
yeah.
how did you decide your major when you went to Texas A&M?
So, great question. For those that I'm sure I'm going to have some interns and perhaps some colleagues that'll listen in, and so I come from a little bit of a different background getting into construction. I have an undergrad in business management. I really enjoy business. I think at the time in college, I didn't really understand the people aspect of business, but now that I've grown into my role, I understand the importance of business and people and integrating all that. So it all makes sense looking back now why I enjoyed business. Um, and so I did my undergrad at Texas State. I did about 10 years in the industry, and decided I'm gonna go for something else. I'm gonna get a master's and progress my learning. And I had looked at an MBA, but I already had an undergrad in business. And so an MBA would essentially kind of be an extension of my undergrad, just a little bit more focused and probably a little bit more in the weeds. But I thought, let me complement the undergrad with a technical approach. And so A&M has I think it's a 6-year-old program now. So still relatively new, but it's a Master of Engineering Technical Management degree. So basically, it's taking a technical minded individual, type A engineering type, and excelling them into more of a leadership type role. Uh, I was an oddball. I think, one of two construction guys in the whole program out of like, I think 80 people in my graduating class. So we brought a different perspective, different mindset to it. Um, but that was really what drew me to it. As I said, let me complement. I'm always thinking of contrast, comparing contrast, and so everything that I do, I want to make sure that I'm complementing a skill or a talent that I already have in place. And so, hard skills versus soft skills. I'm always trying to figure out what's the next soft skill that I need to work on. What's the emotional intelligence piece of my life that I haven't figured out yet? What's the hard skill in this? What's the data that I'm not understanding? And naturally building those. And I'm showing my hands here because it's going up one and then inching up another, and you keep doing this, and that's just kind of how I continue my progression, is the slow grind, just focusing on those skills, honing in, and moving forward.
Yeah, I'm having the wherewithal to continue a path that you've already started building that foundation, being able to continuously IQ versus EQ. It's kind of what I took from that is some people say IQ is fixed and EQ is learned. And I think there's a little bit of both. I think you can have a high IQ or a low IQ and you can increase it as long as you take disciplined habits and learn how to learn better.
Yeah.
Other is on the EQ side. Some people are born with the ability to connect with others and be extremely intuitive very early on. But if you don't refine that and put that skill towards a direction, you're not truly going to reach that potential or see the results that you could. And so by continuously, gradually, leveling up on both sides, you're polishing yourself as a person and as a leader that can then influence and scale, programs, teams,
Yeah.
operational structures, things like that. So it's cool to see your perspective from the construction side, also getting a master's degree. And, any advanced degree is going to have certain disciplines within it, and especially within business and management and people, especially with the direction you went. So wanted to ask, was there any moments that you were managing teams where you just felt overwhelmed? You're like, okay, this is just way too much.
I have. It's weird sometimes. I was joking with a colleague today. We were laughing. I'm in my later 30s now, but it's gotten to the point where I can kind of see the last 10 years and really reflect on some seasons in my life. And I've had some very difficult seasons that I would never take back. They've been coming out of those seasons, although difficult in the moment, have been severe growth spurts for me. And so, particularly, I think at about year 5 and 6 of my construction career, and I say construction, I'm a little off of, I started out running pools. So, when you're looking at that, you add in probably another 3 to 4 years of management before that. But specifically construction, about 5 to 6 years in, I reached a point where I think I was on that low point of I'm going to learn something in this. I don't know what it is yet, but there was just a grind of everything was coming at me. Situations I hadn't dealt with as far as project issues, situations I hadn't dealt with, people issues, up the food chain, down the food chain, bosses, direct reports. It seemed like everything was kind of firing on all cylinders, and I was in the middle with that pressure. And in the moment, it's kind of hard to find clarity, especially when, it's your job and you've got a paycheck you're trying to worry about. You've got a career. For me, I've always thought about what's my 5-10 year plan. And so specifically, I'll focus on the team aspect of it. I was in a role where I wasn't essentially a leader on paper. And what I mean by that is, companies have their hierarchies, things like that. So I didn't have a group of direct reports that directly came to me, but I was in a position of influence. And I felt like, there was a time, there was a place I needed to lead, and I was having a hard time figuring out how to lead that team. And ultimately, we had a lot of failures in that season of my life. And probably some people may listen to this and they'll know what season I'm talking about. And we all look back, we still have a group chat, me and the guys that were in that season, and we were in that fire, and none of us would take it back. Maybe not want to go through it again, but it was one of those moments where we couldn't really see 10 feet in front of us. Now looking back, everything looks clear in the mirror. But that was one of those grit and determination moments of, man, I don't know what I'm going to learn out of this, but I'm going to learn something. And for that, it was a lot of emotional intelligence. It was how to regulate my emotions. It was how to just kind of control my temper. I was definitely a little bit of a hothead back then, and probably said things and did things in rooted emotion and fear and anxiety from just situations where, looking back, that was probably 4-5 years ago now. I would handle that a lot differently. But again, you're going to have those moments. Everybody's going to have those moments in their career, 5-year, 10-year. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. And so generally, when I start getting too comfortable, I got to change something up, because otherwise I'm going to get complacent. And, those are those moments where you look back, you learn, you grow.
Yes. I agree wholeheartedly with that. And life is lived forward, but understood backward.
I like
So
that.
we go through challenges that in the moment, it's hard to compute what's actually going on. But in hindsight, once we get through the up and the down and the up again, or the stabilization of whatever the impact was, we can look back and say, you know what? Now that I've been through it, if that came again, here's what I would do this time. And that's what resilience is, and that's what forward thinking is, and failing forward. I love all those terms, including the one you mentioned. um, I think that construction is very unforgiving, and
Mhm.
there's certain things that are legal, regulatory, safety sensitive things, that if there's a mistake that's made under pressure and it's the wrong decision, it could have a serious impact, not just on the revenue, the money, but on lives. And
Mhm.
it takes a certain aptitude for pressure, and with time you grow through those experiences. And I think it's cool that you can look back and say, even 5 years ago, there's situations that I was challenged in that today would probably be easier, or
Mhm.
you would know how to go about them in a way. There's always unpredictables, but I'm the same way. I went from sales at almost every role I've been at for the last 10 years or longer into business ownership. And there's a whole different set of problems that come with that when you're the one taking the risk. You're the one that's ultimately
Right.
responsible for the good and the bad decisions of what the business has, become or done or not doing. And it's part of maturity and growing, but also to be able to look back from experiences and then to help others by mentoring them. That's a blessing. That's using your skill set, the ability that you can communicate, recollect on, and really look at back at experiences and pave the way for others so they could maybe miss those mistakes or avoid those challenges. And that's one of the reasons I started this podcast, is just to share stories like this with other people.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
good. I was gonna say, I'll bring that full circle. I wrote down on a piece of paper right about, I think August will be about 10 years, where when I was trying to get into construction, I couldn't find somebody to give me a give me an opportunity. And partially it was because I'd been running pools. And so people were having a hard time connecting the dots. But there was a guy that I think I had to call the guy for like 3 weeks, just every other day until he finally answered. But he gave me an opportunity and he let me run with it. And I wrote down 10 years ago a 10-year goal. And I said, in 10 years, I want to be in a position where I can impact somebody's life the way that uh, this guy did for me. And, so full circle to what you were getting at is, 10 years down the road, here I am. I reached a point where I influenced a lot sooner than that. But uh, I really think that's what makes the world tick, man. It's helping other people. It's connecting, collaborating. That's where the value comes in everything we do.
Absolutely. Being able to pay it forward, being able to help someone the way that you wished you could have gotten help, or the way that you did
Yep.
get, an extended hand. And I think that people underestimate what they can do in 10 years. They overestimate what they can do in 1 year. That's usually how it goes. And so I'm very much in line with that, setting goals, writing them down and externalizing them, and then reverse engineering how to get to them by daily
Mhm.
steps that go to weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, 2, 3, 5, 10. There you are. And then boom, you're just like, how do we even get here?
Yep.
Wow. And it's cool to see, you have a similar mindset on that. And I think that it does make people stand out where they have intentionality and where they have purpose and a direction that they're actually working towards, rather than I hope something changes when I'm not. And so
Yes.
do you think that leaders, I mean, the leaders that I know, they've chosen standards above comfort.
Mhm.
They've chosen challenge over, you know, sedation. It's the same
Yeah.
way with me leaving a very, I don't want to say super cushy, because it wasn't the best sales job in the world, but it was a very good earning position in tech, and I could work from home and I could travel when I wanted and things like that. But I went from that to, I have to replace my income completely on my own through commissions and real estate, and through winning contracts where I'm working for free ahead of time. It's given me a totally different perspective on going from a full-time job to starting a business and seeing the challenges. And it gives me a different respect for people that start new things, whether it be a business or a team or a construction project. Or, it's risk adverse, but it shows that the risk takers are really the people that are paving the path. Like
Yeah.
if everyone stays with the status quo, nothing changes.
Exactly.
So that challenge, like what you mentioned about challenging yourself and being comfortable is kind of the end all. I do agree with that. And I think it kind of leads into the next thing, is that pressure and emotional control is something you touched on. When you say you've been through a lot of pressure and managing hundreds of people, I could only imagine. I've never managed teams that big. What do you think pressure exposes in people?
Good question. I think pressure, the exposure that you see from pressure is going to vary depending on the season that individual's in. I think about, I've got interns that I manage at the moment, and they're very fresh. Some of them are only juniors in college, seniors maybe. And so I strategically apply some pressure in certain ways. Now, in my mind, it's pretty light pressure. It's nothing like they're going to deal with 10 years into their career. But I generally use that pressure to see their reaction, their timing of that. So how quickly can they react and how quickly can they pivot? And then within that pivot, also how quickly can they come back? And so a lot of times with interns and even my first, second, third year employees, applying some of that pressure in a very forgiving environment gives them opportunity to learn how to pivot, to learn how to transition. And in that moment, I can gauge, is that individual going to be able to come back? And so I've had some interns that I've given them some pressure, they've kind of fallen off the cliff and they haven't been able to come back. And that means I need to meet them where they're at, and maybe they're not where I need them at that moment. And sometimes that means that we don't progress in the internship program if they're not where I need them at that point. But that's a perfect example of teaching and mentoring and giving them the opportunity to grow from that. And some people don't. It was eye-opening to me within the first 3 or 4 years out of college, where I met people and I realized, like, wait a minute, like, this person's been in the industry for like 25 years and they're comfortable right here. I was like, man, I want to like pass that person in 5 years. One of the things I've realized though is some people are happy with that, and that's totally cool. You've got to have individuals that are comfortable. And we call them SMEs, subject matter experts. And so some people really dig deep into something and they get so good at this one thing, and they love that. I'm a little bit more of a guy where I want to get my hands on everything, and so flip it to the other end of the spectrum. Now, when you see pressure applied to an executive, a vice president at their level, oftentimes it exposes the same things. I've seen some execs where under pressure, they responded similar to like an intern that I've had, but on the flip side, you see some of these executives and, man, they've been through these seasons and they're so regiment to where the pressure comes at them and they're calm, cool, collected. And those are the executives that I really watch and say, okay, I've got to get to a point where I can regulate at that level. I'm definitely not there yet. I'm only 10 years in the industry. I'm hoping in the next 5 years, I can really hone that in. That's the season of life I'm in right now, is regulating, so that I can better manage and influence my teams. But yeah, I think that's the two spectrums of pressure and what it exposes.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And pressure reveals your identity And a business, if you create one, or if you're under pressure in your position, a lot of your personal identity is going to be exposed in moments that are high stakes, and they have a lot of pressure because you are you, no matter what business you're working in, no matter what team you're on, you're going to react based on how you are feeling.
Mhm.
A lot of it's feelings, and like you said, regulation, being able to identify what feelings are fear and insecurity and anxiety, and then what feelings are um, you're gonna be able to ignore, basically, to push through and through
Yeah.
discipline be able to still achieve. But you don't want to ignore them all either, because sometimes our feelings are telling us something for a reason. And like you said, some people, no matter what season of life they're in, they're going to react the same way as, maybe they would react 20, 25 years ago, where others, they're able to evolve to that level of, just precision and absolute discipline, and being so calculated and understand the entirety of the equation that they're not going to crumble under pressure, or, being questioned. They're going to clutch out, and they're going to, do the
Yeah.
job that they earned. And so that's one of the things that I've noticed in my personal life. Usually when I'm under pressure, I grow, and when I'm under pressure, I find a way to hit that next level or hit that next gear, to where, because I'm so terrified of failure or not being able to perform, that I will do whatever it takes, to get to that next level.
Yeah.
But even me today, I'm in my mid 30s, and I've noticed, compared to 10 years ago, I'm in a better place mentally, but at the same time, I have a lot more to lose today.
Mhm.
I have a wife, I have a family, I have dog, cat,
Yeah.
fur family right now, and a house. And if I mess up with these businesses, I could lose all of that.
Mhm.
Whereas 10 years ago, I had what was in my car, when I moved to Denver,
Yeah.
and that was about it.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of ambition. So it also depends on the season, like you mentioned, the season that you're at in the life, and the person that you're managing, and understanding all the different circumstances around that. But there's some things where, there's things that you can be systematic about, and there's things you can't be. It's
Mhm.
more emotional, it's more relational. um, have you seen where ego has been a problem, preventing someone from getting a result?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't speak too much about other industries. Construction's kind of my gig now. Probably where I'm going to retire, but construction, there is a lot of ego. And, historically, construction is a male dominated environment. We've made a lot of strides in the last decade, even longer than that, of, more of a female presence, which I think is great, because it's adding a whole different dynamic that um, I think is better for the industry. But we still have those individuals, and myself and included, there are moments of ego where uh, I'll give you an example. If we've got a job situation that involves risk, and it turns into a safety situation. Um, a couple of factors that are at play there is financial impact. And so generally, me as a project manager, I've got to think about financial impact. That's, up front, foremost in my brain, but also we've got to think about the safety situation. And uh, there are occasions where you run into some guys that have a really hard time walking that line of, man, this is my job. There's not going to be any safety issues, and they're just blowing past uh, blatantly obvious safety issues. But it's it's twofold. That you've got that ego in there where it's like, man, I've been doing this. I know what I'm doing. You get a little complacent. You almost get blinders on because you've been successful. You've not had injuries on your project, and that's where things get dangerous. Uh, Now on the flip side, sometimes you get that just from just pure adrenaline, especially in our industry when we're production focused. There are times where production, and as much as anybody says safety is first and foremost, um, if you're not driving that line every day of yes, production and safety it's not production but safety, it's and. Um, if we don't break down those silos and say these are connected and they got to work together, and really focus on the individuals that might have that inflated ego, that's when things start to go awry on a project. And so generally, I use humor as a way to diffuse things. It's how I've done things my entire life. Um, Sometimes goes well on a job site, sometimes it doesn't. But most of the time, when I run into guys that I feel like, man, there's an ego issue, I'm going to flip it around. I'm going to bring some humor in there. I'm going to drop them down a level and figure out, okay, how do we get this back in perspective? And maybe drop the ego without fully deflating the head, because we still need to produce and move things along. But it is a struggle in this industry. I'm sure in other industries as well. I'm sure you can probably pinpoint some times you've had a little bit of ego in your career, as well as I.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So,
especially in sales when you close a huge deal or you're
yeah.
working on a huge deal and it doesn't close and you've already talked smack to all of your teammates or
Mhm.
your, because it's very
Yeah.
competitive. It's like
Yeah.
you want to ring the bell, hit the dong, whatever you want to call it, put your name on the board, be able to, leaderboards, stuff like that. And I've seen people, cut ethics, professionality, take shortcuts to where they didn't do the full qualification,
Mhm.
discovery, just to close the deal. And like that's the ultimate goal, is just to close the deal and to do the
Right.
transaction. But it might not have even been the right product for someone.
Mhm.
And then they end up churning, they end up canceling, they get a refund or whatever it might be. And so I think it kind of aligns with safety and production. Same thing with the standards in other industries, like food quality versus profits, healthcare quality,
Yeah.
profits, things like that. Um, and that's actually a really good segue to, financial controls. They happen, in America, especially where it's capitalism,
Mhm.
almost like short-term thinking versus what's ultimately going to be better in, 20, 50, 100 years. Do you see where projects bleed quietly, where maybe they're planning for something short-sighted, or they're trying to just get the project done so they can move on to the next one, and in the background they didn't do something correct, and now it's bleeding money because you're gonna have to go back and redo the project again, break what's already been built if it's not built
Yeah.
properly. I don't have a lot of construction experience, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking could happen.
For sure. It unfortunately it happens more often than I would like. I think most people can say that in the industry. Um, there's so many variables nowadays that come into the business, and it's clients from owners. You've got owners reps. You've got financing that they've got to work through. You've got design teams that are all under a crunch. It's a waterfall effect starting from the owners. They got to get their capital in place, they got to get their financing, and generally that lags. And once that's in place, then the engineers are said, okay, go. And everybody's under a crunch, starting with the owner financing. Everything gets delayed, so you get down to the project base where it's like execution time, it's go time. And uh, then in that moment, everybody's in that crunch, and the last thing to really go out the door is developing your team and your people, because ultimately you're under a crunch. You've got a timeline. Oftentimes you have liquidated damages, which is a hefty bill if you don't meet your schedule. But then you're also managing the fact that you've got people, and as we talked earlier on, people is what drives what we do. And so it's this balancing act of, I've got some people on a project I want to develop, but I also know we're behind schedule. And I've seen individuals that say, you know what, I don't have time to teach. That's not my job. I've had people tell me that. And quite frankly, I've tried to move away from those individuals, because that's not the room I want to be a part of. But what happens is that there's an indirect cost for not building your people and not focusing on some of those people aspects. And the direct cost is what everybody focuses on. It's, in my opinion, it's the easiest thing to focus on because the data shows it. You can look on a spreadsheet, you can see this is the quantitative information. generally I've gotten into spats with people because I focus a lot on qualitative, because in my opinion, that indirect cost might bleed the project more than the direct costs. But if you're only focusing on the direct costs, oftentimes you miss what's happening behind the scenes, and that's, you've got maybe a team morale issue, you've got a development issue. Construction is so booming right now. Every company is hiring, right? So if you're not developing somebody in the way that they want to be developed, there's a good chance somebody else is knocking at the door and they're going to do it for you. And I've seen it happen on my projects, and I'm been blessed enough to get to a point where I can really help mentor that team. But that's a perfect example of kind of the bleed, where everybody's in crunch time, everybody's hyper focused on what's the schedule, what's the data show on the spreadsheet, and they forget about the fact that, man, everybody out here, they're just people, and they want to go home safe, but a lot of times they just want to learn, and they want to grow, and they want to be part of the team. And sometimes that's missed on the project, and sometimes that's a more costly mistake in the long run than looking at what's this week's production going to look like. So
Yeah, that actually leads perfectly into the next point about mentorship and legacy. When I started this podcast, it was a double meaning behind the name. Obviously, it's personal branding for my last name, but it's also a word that means toughened, hardened, has gone through, weathered, things like that. And Callis Mindset isn't just performance, it's multiplication through sharing a mindset. And that leads me to the next point of, you mentioned mentorship and leading teams. Can you tell me more about the ACE Mentor program?
yeah, so I'm actually pretty green to that. I just made the connection with their executive director probably a couple weeks ago. So I can probably give a brief overview. Actually, next week is going to be my first interaction with the group. But essentially, I'm heavily involved in recruiting. I've been that way for most of my career in construction, just because I just enjoy people and I have a passion, and I want to build things. I want to build buildings, but I also want to build teams and people. And we've reached a point in construction where, and you've probably seen the data, and you're probably seeing it a little bit in Idaho now with the construction boom, where there's a huge suck for people, and people are going to get sucked to where the volume is. And so the newest trend for construction is data centers. All these data centers are just scooping people up. And so the talk now is, how do we get people back involved in the trades? And my personal opinion is that needs to start in high school. And so I do a lot of recruiting at colleges. I was at U of H and Texas State last week, meeting a lot of the college kids that have got their undergrad. They're getting ready to enter the world. But I've really said, okay, how do I get a hold of the high school kids and find the kids that maybe don't want to go to college? And there's a path for them. You and I, when we were kind of in high school, you might have been a little bit different, but for me, it was like, you go to college. That was what you do. The trades was not a thing for me. Actually, I wanted to go. I wanted to be a welder, and but I'm not unhappy with my path. I went to school, great, but there are some individuals in high school that they need to understand there's a different path. And so the ACE Mentor program is essentially an opportunity for me to get involved with the high school kids to mentor that path. And whether that path is college for them, great. But hey, let's show you how to get into construction through the college path. But my personal hope, as well, as I can really tap in and understand what kind of talent is coming out of high school. I can see the talent level, the EQ, the IQ, all that stuff. I can see where they're at coming out of college, but I want to take it a step further and go, okay, I'm going to look at this pipeline, not just 10 years back. What am I looking at 15 years back? What is this kid right now? What do they look like? And how am I going to be able to lead them when they're in their mid-20s? And so that's really, for me personally, it's an opportunity to mentor, but it's an opportunity to kind of understand high schoolers because they're not like high schoolers, of our generation. It's a completely different generation. So,
Yeah, it's
uh,
true. So true. And I think looking further back gives you a bigger opportunity to get them when they're young enough to be still open to learning more and
yeah,
not already set in whatever colleges told them.
mhm,
You know,
yeah,
college is
true,
great. And for you and I, it was expected, like you go. But
yeah,
for me, it also showed me an opportunity to learn who I was during that time. And I think if I would have been in real estate a little bit more in high school, I don't know if I would have gone to college.
mhm,
And I don't need my degree for what I do today. And I don't remember a single job that's ever asked me for it. And
yeah,
so it's like, did I even need it? But I did, because it was the growth and the learning and the leadership and everything that came
yeah,
with it. But I think there's a different path today for a lot of young Americans. And I think that if I was gonna redo it again today, I would definitely go into the trades, or I would go into real estate right off the bat.
mhm,
Just get a license,
yeah,
literally that's how it works. And so I think that when you're a leader and you have experience and you have a certain personality type, you almost have an obligation to help other people.
mhm,
And if you're not, you're wasting your own talent. It's like,
yeah,
I don't know, it's just an objective way I think, but I've always thought that way is, if you've walked a path, someone else walked it before you most likely, and there was probably someone there that helped you get there at some way, even if it was just a good word of advice, support, verbally, whatever it
yeah,
was. And it doesn't take a lot. It just takes your time, And
for
so
sure. Yeah.
I think that's a really admirable thing that you're doing, and helping mentor and lead the next generation. I've got a young sister who's looking at architecture. She's looking at
Mhm.
colleges right now and different programs. And I can tell, if we didn't have the schools that we had out here and the programs, she's got like an advanced school that she goes and does architecture classes in high school, which we didn't have at my public
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
So it's cool to see just what technology has
Right.
opened for younger minds, and the path that they're going to be taking. And I'm definitely on board with that. So I wanted to next talk about an identity shift question.
Mhm.
And it's just going to be like, maybe if you think about a moment specifically that you remember. You did mention there was a phase or a time where you had some other people on your team and you all look back to that. But if someone wants to operate on a really high level, bigger projects, bigger teams,
Yeah,
what identity shift do they need to internally make to get them there?
for sure. So a word comes to mind when you say that, and so I think of redefining myself. And when I look at my career, funny, I was literally talking to somebody about this morning, about how I've evaluated the seasons of my life, and um, I think for individuals looking to grow, you've got to get comfortable with redefining yourself. And a pivotal redefining moment for me was I went from managing pools, and great opportunity, loved what I did, really enjoyed the people, but I had to redefine myself once I got into construction, and I had to relearn who I was. And I say relearn who I was. I think we're always molding ourselves and changing. But really, the redefining one is the best way to kind of level yourself up. And I always like to look at things on a multi-layer. I probably overanalyze, make things more difficult than probably most of my bosses have ever wanted. Um, but I generally try to find a way of what I do now, how can it relate to somebody else, and or some other role, some other position, some other project. Uh, there's a connection somehow, some way. Uh, I'll use real estate as an example. It's always been on my mind that one of these days I'd maybe want to tap into real estate. So, I've followed you for several years. I think we met on the ski slope back at Keystone, and I knew, I was like, man, this guy, he's got the energy. Um, but I'm always evaluating, okay, what are my skills right now? How can those skills parlay into real estate, or how do those parlay into sales? Another thing that I've always felt like I wanted to try sales of some sort. Um, I think I'm better at selling myself I don't necessarily have a product that I've ever sold, but I sell myself. I sell, change orders and things like that to clients. Um, but that's really kind of the grassroots of redefining an individual. Leveling yourself up, you've got to hone in those skills. You've got to improve those skills, but you've got to understand that you put yourself in your own box. And so if you create a box and you want to fit in that box, great. But if you start understanding how you can intermingle those skills across divisions, across industries, across teams, groups, uh, any which way you want to look at it, you can redefine yourself however you want. Who knows? In 30 years, I might redefine myself as an entrepreneur, which is something that excites me. I'm a little risk averse, which, kudos to you for taking that jump. But that might be a redefining moment in my life as well, where I take some of these skills and translate them. So,
Yeah, it's very well said. Redefining yourself and pushing on boundaries that maybe you thought you had, making yourself uncomfortable in the pursuit of growth and evolution to becoming a better, not necessarily better,
yeah,
but a different person that has the skills that, maybe you didn't think you could have.
yeah,
And I've met a lot of people that they didn't think they would be good at something. They never tried it. And then they tried it much later in life. And they're like, holy cow, I wish I would have done this 20 years ago because this is my specialty now.
yeah,
And the average entrepreneur is like in their high 50s or maybe 60s. And the average millionaire is like in their 50s or 60s.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
money aside, like money's changing, in our country, it's becoming worth less daily. But the fact is that you have to set yourself aside as a leader or someone who can multiply or replicate something, whether it's ideas, products, services, systems, operational tracks, things like that. And I think that if you do box yourself in, you for sure have an answer. Whether
yeah,
you think you're right or wrong, you're right. Right.
yeah, yeah. That's so true.
So I think that, redefinition is it's a really good hot word or keyword for that. And it makes sense to me. And, you do that through changing your habits. You do that through changing the way that you think, the way that you talk, and the way that you live. And
Yeah,
that's been, something for me is I've had to realize in order to get there, I've got to first get here, and
yeah,
in order to get where
yeah,
I want to go, I've got to fix, got to get my mind and in my heart and my soul and make sure I'm right there. Then I can make incremental changes to become, whatever that goal is, whatever that place that you think is, the success, whatever that might mean to you.
yeah,
Because it changes and people, they move once you make a field goal, the goalposts move,
right.
right? Like they get bigger, and it's about using, like you said, what you've already experienced, the skills and the experience that you've created through maybe a small job. Like my first job was pushing carts and cleaning toilets and sweeping floors at Albertsons. Like it was crazy to think just 2 years ago, I did an evaluation of myself it was like over 2 years ago when I turned 30. And I look back to when I was 20 and I compared like what I was making financially.
Mhm.
And it was like such a big difference that it didn't seem like it made sense. And
Right.
it made me question, well, how did I create this value?
Mhm.
Like why today am I worth 30 of what I was when I was making, minimum wage back in my high school years when minimum wage was $5 or whatever that might, was back then. But it's through incremental changes and shifting your mindset and being open to growth. And I think you're an exemplary example of that. And, I just want to say thanks for sharing your story today.
Yep.
And if anyone wants to go connect with Austin, find him on LinkedIn, connect with him on socials. Do you have any place you want to send anyone or anything like that?
You can check out my LinkedIn, Austin Gary. Feel free to look me up. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I generally share boring articles from the Harvard Business Review and maybe occasional commentary. But happy to connect on LinkedIn and like-minded people wanting to share the energy, bring it my way.
Amazing. Well, thanks again for listening to the Callis Mindset. And if this episode gave you clarity, perspective, or just an idea of what disciplined execution looks like in the real world, where leadership isn't theoretical, it's tested daily, keep following us. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, like I mentioned. You can check out other mentor programs if you feel that calling where you're at. And remember, pressure doesn't build character, it reveals it. Keep leading yourself, keep raising your standards, and keep choosing discipline. We'll see you next time.